The Advent and Christmas season is, of course, a season that is filled with music. Before I move on to our story tonight, I want to give a word of thanks to our musicians, to the singers, our instrumentalists, our handbell players, all those who make the music happen, and especially to our Associate Pastor Karen Hastings-Flegel for all their work this season. Let's give them a round of applause. As if the season is not busy enough, they also have lots of other work to do, so we thank them for their wonderful ministry of music. This is also, of course, a season filled with stories. We've heard some of them tonight in our scripture readings. There are many more, of course. And of course, the birth of Christ led to many different stories in our cultures and in our literature. This congregation has a tradition of sharing a story on Christmas Eve, which I very much appreciate because it means I don't have to write a sermon for tonight. Hopefully you appreciate that as well. I'm going to share a story that comes from a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom, and the author is Rachel Naomi Raymond. She shares a story about a shepherd. Well, a shepherd of sorts, as you will hear. So let me go ahead and share this story with us. It goes like this. She says, when I met Thomas, he was over 70. He was a family practice physician who had been in solo practice for almost 50 years. At the time that we met, Thomas had end-stage lung cancer. He could no longer get around without oxygen, and the previous month he had closed his medical practice. Until the last year, he had never missed a day of work in almost 50 years. Now he knew that he was dying, and we began some conversations because he wanted to ready himself for what was coming. Thomas had left the church early in life. He'd embraced science as a way to bring order out of the chaos of life. Thomas felt that death was an unqualified end to life. And it surprised me that a man that was so compassionate and caring toward others held no religious or spiritual beliefs. Thomas had been a loner his whole life. He had never married. His major commitment was to medicine, to his families, to their needs, their hopes, and their dreams. His devotion to them was absolute. Once I asked Thomas how he saw his relationship with his parents. Looking at the small figurine of a shepherd with his flock that I had on my desk, he smiled and he said, like that. The shepherd was a steward of the life of the flock. He protected them from danger. He helped them to find nurture and to fulfill themselves. He delivered their young. He found strays and brought them back home. Thomas told me many stories of his shepherding and the life of his flock. In these talks, he often used the old Victorian word that they sheltered with him. He was their safety, their support, their friend. He was there for them, constant and vigilant and trustworthy. All the while, though, Thomas was becoming more and more ill. One day I asked him, who did he shelter with? Who was the shepherd's shepherd? No one, he answered, the words holding more pain than he'd ever expressed before. It was clear that he did not believe that there was a place of sheltering for himself. Shepherd though he was professionally, personally, he had become separated from the flock, a non-participant, a lost person. Puzzled, I asked Thomas to make up a story about a lost lamb. Haltingly, he described a lamb who had been lost for so long that he could not even remember that there was a flock. He had survived by himself. To eat what was available, to hide from predators. I asked him, does the lamb know that the shepherd is looking for him? No, Thomas said. The lamb has done something very bad, and the shepherd had forgotten him. As a shepherd yourself, I asked, would you look for a lost lamb who had done something bad? Thomas looked puzzled. I reminded him of a patient he had rescued from an abusive home, a girl who eventually went on to college. I asked him why he had gone after her and brought her home. Why, she was one of mine, he said unhesitatingly. Yes, I said. There was a small silence, and then he changed the subject. Thomas's health continued to worsen. Hospice was called in, and by the beginning of December, he was so short of breath he could no longer speak. But somehow he kept hanging on. The hospice workers were surprised by his endurance. One of the nurses told me it was as though he was waiting for something, but she didn't know what it was. On Christmas Eve, I received a call from the nurse. Thomas had been in a coma all day and was having difficulty. Would I come? As soon as I saw him, I knew Thomas was in his last moments. I talked to him, but he didn't respond. Gradually, the space between his breaths lengthened, and soon after, he stopped breathing. The young nurse looked relieved. There was nothing else to do. I stood for a while at the foot of Thomas's bed, wondering what he had been holding on for. And then I left. It was dark and quite cold outside. I had almost reached my car when church bells throughout the city began ringing. For a moment, I stopped, confused. Could they be ringing for Thomas? And then I remembered. And suddenly I knew for certain what Thomas had waited for. It was midnight on Christmas Eve, and the shepherd had come.